Transatlantic flights are probably some of the most grueling flights a regular Joe can take. If you've ever flown from New York to London, then you probably know that it usually takes around about 7 to 8.5 hours to travel between the two cities. A long and grueling trip where you have to sit in your seat for that amount of time. But you probably know that with the supersonic Concorde, this flight time had been cut in half down to 3 hours, and in 1996, a Concorde flew from New York to London in 2 hours, 52 minutes and 59 seconds. Even today, it remains the fastest time in which an airliner crossed the Atlantic. But what if you could go even faster? Well, there was a plane that was up to the job. One that wasn't known to the public for years. A plane that flew so fast it could outrun missiles. A plane that could go from New York to London in a record-setting 1 hour and 54 minutes. And that plane was the SR-71. After the Allies defeated the Axis powers in World War II, there were only two superpowers in the world, the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. And the sheer different ideologies the two superpowers believed in led to the Cold War. Although the two countries never declared war on each other, they were distrustful of one another. But the two wanted to make sure that they had the upper hand. Of course, this led to the two trying to one-up each other. But there was one important thing that the two absolutely needed to be better at than the other. And that was intelligence gathering. Intelligence gathering is a very important task for any country that has some problems with a foe. Knowing your opponent's next move is vital, but doing that is easier said than done. But the US was at a disadvantage. Because unlike the Soviet Union, the US didn't close its border to anyone, and as a result, it became very easy to spy on the US. And soon, a few spy rings formed in the Americas. But the US didn't have any way of infiltrating the USSR, and the borders were heavily guarded. But soon, they had a genius solution, and that solution was the U-2. The U-2 was a groundbreaking aircraft for its day. It was unlike anything that came before it. It had incredibly long wings, and the plane could cruise at 70,000 feet. The plane was so secret that they built a base at Groom Lake in the Nevada desert and labeled it Area 51 so that they could test the thing in secrecy. The plane was so good that everyone thought the plane couldn't be tracked by radar, and that it was invulnerable to Soviet defenses because it flew that high. But the Soviets knew about the aircraft the moment it started flying over the USSR. And on the 1st of May 1960, a U-2 piloted by CIA agent Gary Powers was shot down over the USSR. This was a disaster since the wreckage was paraded around the Soviet Union. Now they had no way of spying on the communist state. Now they needed a replacement. But a solution was already on the way. And that solution was the A-12. When the U-2 was put into service, the CIA already doubted the plane's capabilities. So the CIA wanted to replace the U-2. But this time, they wanted an aircraft that was truly invulnerable. Not just one that flew high, but fast, and one that was hard to detect and shoot down. So two companies were entrusted with building this new all-of-a-kind jet. The two companies were Convair and Lockheed Martin. Convair brought their Kingfish to the table, and Lockheed Martin their A-12, designed by Kelly Johnson, the man who designed the U-2. Ultimately, Lockheed won the contract and went ahead with building their new, one-of-a-kind aircraft. Kelly Johnson and his team were entrusted with building this new, innovative jet. But in the meantime, the U-2 kept flying over the Soviet Union until the eventual shoot-down in 1960. But development didn't take long, and on the 25th of April 1962, the first A-12 took to the skies. In total, 13 A-12s were built, and the jet was deployed over Vietnam and Korea with the help of the Air Force. And they functioned so well that North Korean radar operators thought their radars were glitching. Notably, there was a fighter variant called the YF-12 and the M-21, a modified A-12 designed to carry a D-21 drone. But these versions were scrapped in favor of a new version, built for the Air Force, called the SR-71 Blackbird. The SR-71, alongside its other variants, were unlike anything that came before them. The SR-71 had two massive Y-58 turbojet engines that could power the craft up to Mach 3. The Blackbird had a powerful side-looking camera that could look hundreds of miles into enemy territory. The Blackbird was 93% titanium. The reason being that when the Blackbird flew at such high speeds, at such high altitude, the plane would then heat up to a point that regular aircraft aluminium would just melt away. So they used titanium to deal with the incredible heat. And this, by the way, was the first time titanium was utilized like this. The airframe of the Blackbird was also special. When it sat on the ground, the plane would leak fuel, because the airframe was designed to expand when the airframe heated up at such high speeds. So when it was on the ground, the panels were loose. Of course, this led to the SR-71 pilots always trying to get up into the air to refuel on a KC-135 extender before the plane ran out of fuel. But for the fuel leak, the Blackbird made up in speed. The SR-71 could fly up to Mach 3, or 3,700 kilometers per hour, or 2,300 miles per hour. This made it the fastest plane ever built. Because of this, the Blackbird was put into service in January 1966 and went on to serve for 32 years, always flying alongside Soviet borders and spying into Soviet territory with its powerful camera. During its service time, 4,000 missiles were fired at the Blackbird. Not even one got close. That's how good the Blackbird was. But the advancement of surface-to-air missiles and interceptors made it more and more dangerous to keep the Blackbird flying. But even though the plane was never shot down, about 12 Blackbirds of all 32 SR-71s ever built crashed. See, although the plane was never shot down, its worst enemy was ironically itself. The plane had some notorious problems with tires. Because of the high takeoff speed combined with the heavy takeoff weight resulted in some tires blowing up, and some of these tire bursts ended up being catastrophic. Another problem was the engines. Sometimes, due to unlucky circumstances, the airflow in front of the afterburner briefly stalled and led to an engine producing only 15 to 20% thrust. Problem was, this would mostly only happen on one engine. So this would cause one engine to be on full throttle and the other only on 15 to 20% thrust. This was usually a recipe for calamity. This engine problem led to an infamous SR-71 crash over New Mexico. Eventually, Lockheed developed a computerized system to warn the pilots if an engine stalled, and the system was added to reignite the stalling engine. Despite these problems, the plane would go on to serve for 32 years. For many years, it was simply untouchable. But as said before, the advancement of surface-to-air missiles and interceptors led to the plane becoming more and more vulnerable. This became clear when in 1987, during a patrol in the Baltic Sea, a Blackbird's engine ended up exploding at 20 kilometers altitude and ended up dropping down to lower altitude. The plane turned back around, but in the process ended up violating Swedish airspace. Two YA-37 Viggens intercepted the Blackbird and ended up escorting it out of Swedish airspace. Late data showed that MiG-25s were on their way to the stricken Blackbird, and one even locked on the plane but didn't fire due to the aforementioned YA-37 Viggens. This incident proved that it would only be a matter of time before the Blackbird's days were over. And soon they came in 1990, when the legendary Blackbird was retired, with one Blackbird making a record-setting flight from Washington to Los Angeles in 67 minutes to the Smithsonian's museum. And that was the end of it. Except it wasn't. By the end of the 80s, the SR-71 was already in trouble. See, Generals in the USAF felt like they didn't necessarily need an invulnerable spy plane like the Blackbird, since they didn't value strategic intelligence and the main users of these jets were the CIA, NSA, and DSA. Although, this was primarily because they had a lack of understanding of aerial reconnaissance. Also, the Blackbird lacked the capability to deliver real-time data, which its less capable counterpart, the U-2, had been outfitted with. There were attempts to add such a system, but a few factions within the Pentagon and Congress, who were already set on the program's demise, countered it. But eventually the Blackbird started retiring in 1989, and by 1990 all Blackbirds had retired, with a few being stored if needed for a reactivation. And that's exactly what happened. In 1995, Congress allocated $100 million to restore 3 Blackbirds after concerns arose over the situation in the Middle East and North Korea. But it was later cut to $72.5 million. 2 Blackbirds were reactivated, with the third status being uncertain. Problem was, the reactivation was not very appreciated by UAV developers, since they thought the money allocated for them could be shifted to the Blackbirds. So in 1997, President Bill Clinton tried to use the line item veto to cancel $39 million allocated to the Blackbirds. But the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. But the Blackbird's days were already numbered by then, and in 1998 they were retired from the Air Force. 2 were sent to NASA, and on the 9th of October 1999, the SR-71 Blackbird made its last flight. The Blackbird left an incredible legacy behind. A legacy of speed, altitude height, but most importantly, a legacy of human ingenuity. Nobody thought such a plane could ever be built. Yet through a few rulers and pencils and with a deadline, these engineers at Lockheed did something incredible. The Blackbird died with the Cold War, but because of this one plane, we were able to keep peace during the Cold War. The fact that even today, you need some of the most advanced surface-to-air missiles to even hit the Superbird is incredible. It's safe to say that the SR-71 was the best of its days. But the days of spying on enemy territory by using a fast or high-flying plane is over. Nowadays, you use a satellite. Except satellites and UAVs can't really replace some of the advantages the Blackbird had. Which is why in 2013, Lockheed Martin introduced the Blackbird's successor, the SR-72 son of the Blackbird. A prototype is already being built and set to make its first flight in 2025. And who knows? If the project is successful, maybe one day we might hear the sounds of a fast spy plane again. Maybe all we have to do is blink once, and maybe we might see a paper plane-like airplane again, flying at speeds far exceeding the sound barrier. And who knows, maybe we might hear those sonic booms once again.